The courtroom was silent. Cameras clicked. Whispers echoed like thunder between the marble pillars. Everyone had expected a spectacle. But not like this. He was only 16. A self-made millionaire, yes, but also a kid standing alone. His custom-tailored suit swallowed him now, like armor without a knight inside. His name was Mason Hale. Orphaned young. Rose through tech. And now, accused of fraud he didn't commit. Where's his legal team? The judge barked, squinting through her glasses. I was told the top law firm in the state was representing him. Silence. They quit this morning, Your Honor, the bailiff replied. Statement cited, conflict of interest. The courtroom gasped. Mason's face remained stone cold, but his knuckles whitened as he clutched the defense table. The prosecutor smirked. No one was coming. Except, a high-pitched voice rang out from the back, I'll be his lawyer. Heads spun. Phones went up. A 10-year-old girl, wearing oversized glasses and a backpack almost twice her size, marched down the aisle. The judge's gavel slammed down, but it couldn't silence the shockwave that hit the courtroom. Order. Order. Young lady, this is not a place for jokes, she said sternly. But the little girl didn't flinch. She walked straight up to the defense table, stood beside Mason Hale, and calmly placed a thick folder on the table. My name is Emily Carter. I may be 10, but I've studied every piece of this case, and I know the law better than those cowards who abandoned him. Gasps. Whose child is this? The prosecutor scoffed. Bailiff, get her out of here. But the bailiff didn't move. Sir, he said hesitantly, this is Emily Carter. Daughter of the late Jonathan Carter, the judge who rewrote half the state's youth advocacy laws. She's been in Courtroom since she was 3. Emily turned to Mason, who hadn't said a word. His eyes were wide. Confused. But also, hopeful. She spoke without looking away from him. They don't care about the truth. I do. The judge slowly leaned forward. Miss Carter, you do realize the seriousness of this case. This is a multi-million-dollar fraud charge. Emily didn't blink. And I can prove it was a setup. All I ask is 5 minutes to speak. The courtroom went silent again. 5 minutes, against an entire legal machine. The judge stared at her for a moment. Then slowly nodded. 5 minutes. But only to present an opening statement. Emily turned, climbed onto a footstool someone slid her way, and faced the courtroom like she'd done it 100 times. And then she began, my client is not the criminal here. But I'll tell you who is. Emily's voice was calm. Steady. Too steady for someone her age. She pointed toward the prosecution's table. Your Honor, the state is accusing Mason Hale of funneling investor money into offshore accounts. But that theory hinges entirely on digital transaction logs provided by one man, Mr. Felix Monroe, the company's former CFO. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. His smirk faded. Emily pulled out a small object from her pocket and raised it for the court to see. A flash drive? The judge asked. Emily nodded. This contains video surveillance from the Hale Tech offices, footage from the night the so-called fraud was committed. Footage that was conveniently missing from the evidence submitted by the prosecution. How did you get that? The prosecutor demanded. I asked the janitor, Emily replied plainly. He told me the security servers weren't wiped like Felix claimed, they were just moved to the secondary server room. No one bothered to check because no one wanted the truth. She plugged the flash drive into the courtroom's evidence display system. The screen lit up. There, in grainy black and white, was Felix Monroe, alone, late at night, accessing Mason Hale's private accounts. He was on Mason's computer. Transferring funds. Gasps echoed around the room. Pause the video, Emily instructed, her tiny finger pointing to the timestamp. This was recorded 2 hours after Mason left the building. And here's the key detail: Felix used an admin override code that only he had access to. The judge narrowed her eyes. "Miss Carter, is this verified?" Emily nodded. "I had it analyzed by a retired cyberforensics expert my father used to work with. His signed affidavit is in the folder I left on your bench." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Mason looked at Emily like she'd just pulled him from the edge of a cliff. The judge scanned the document, then turned back to the prosecutor. "Mr. Reynolds, do you have an explanation?" Reynolds' lips tightened. He had none. Emily stood quietly beside Mason, her arms crossed. She'd just turned the trial on its head. The judge tapped her gavel sharply. "Court will recess for 1 hour while this new evidence is reviewed." But no one moved. Everyone was still staring at Emily. As the judge left the bench, reporters rushed toward the defense table, yelling questions, flashing cameras in Emily's face. Mason tried to step in front of her, to protect her, but she just calmly adjusted her glasses and held up a hand. No comment. Yet. Once the courtroom cleared, Mason finally spoke. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice low, raw. "You don't even know me." Emily looked up at him. "You helped fund a robotics program at the Children's Hospital. That program saved my cousin's life. I know who you are, Mason. And I also know when someone's being set up." Mason didn't respond. But something in him shifted, like he was beginning to believe he might actually have a chance. Emily pulled a crumpled notebook from her backpack and flipped to a tab marked "Motives." "I've been digging through company history, payroll records, and email metadata," she said. "And I think I know why Felix did it." She laid out a printed email thread. At the top, subject, denied, executive position application. Felix had applied to take over Hale Tech's international division. The board rejected him. The person who cast the tie-breaking vote? Mason Hale. "He wanted your seat," Emily said. "So he tried to destroy you and make himself look like the only one left standing." Mason shook his head in disbelief. Emily continued, flipping the page. "But there's more. Felix wasn't working alone." "What?" She pulled out a second folder. "These wire transfers, small at first, then larger, went to an anonymous shell company. That shell is owned by a consulting firm run by a name that kept popping up." Emily paused. Then she whispered the name, Reynolds. Mason's eyes widened. "The prosecutor?" Emily nodded. The trap wasn't just about money. It was about power. And the man trying to put Mason behind bars might be in on it. When court resumed, the room was no longer just curious, it was electrified. Whispers flew. Phones buzzed. News outlets were already outside, broadcasting live. Mason sat taller now, no longer the defeated boy everyone had seen that morning. Emily stood beside him, small but unshakable. The judge returned to the bench, eyes stern. "Miss Carter, you may continue with your statement. But be advised, making accusations without solid proof will not be tolerated." Emily nodded respectfully. "Understood, Your Honor." She walked to the evidence screen again, carrying a new document. "I'd like to submit Exhibit C," she said. Bank transfer records showing a total of $325,000 sent from a shell company linked to Felix Monroe. She tapped the screen, and the records appeared. To a private consulting firm owned by Assistant District Attorney Reynolds. The same Reynolds prosecuting this case. The courtroom erupted. Audible gasps. Someone even dropped their coffee. Reynolds leapt to his feet, red-faced. "This is outrageous. She's a child. This is an attempt to derail justice." The judge slammed her gavel. "Sit down." Reynolds froze. Emily didn't blink. "I also have signed statements from the bank's compliance officer confirming the connection between the accounts." And I have call logs between Felix Monroe and Mr. Reynolds, late at night, the day before Hailtech's internal audit was leaked to the press. The judge turned slowly toward Reynolds. Do you have a response to these explosive allegations? Reynolds' mouth opened, but no words came out. The judge looked down at the folder Emily had submitted. She scanned the documents, silent. Then, bailiff. Escort Mr. Reynolds into custody for questioning. Effective immediately. Reynolds stumbled back. Why, you can't be serious. This is based on a child's. The judge stood up. A child who's doing a better job at uncovering the truth than your entire office. The bailiff grabbed Reynolds' arm. The room was silent again, but this time, in awe. Emily returned to her seat beside Mason. She looked up at him and whispered, "Told you I'd prove it." The next morning, the courtroom was under lockdown. Media vans formed a wall outside the courthouse. Journalists camped overnight. Everyone wanted to know, how did a 10-year-old girl outmaneuver the system? And more importantly, what would she do next? Inside, Mason sat quietly. Emily stood beside him, flipping through her notes like a surgeon preparing for surgery. The judge entered. Today, we'll hear from the key witness, Mr. Felix Monroe. Two bailiffs escorted Felix into the courtroom. He looked rattled but smug, like someone who still thought he could lie his way out of quicksand. He took the stand. His smile was thin. The prosecutor's replacement, a quiet man named Dale Benson, approached. Mr. Monroe, is it true you accessed Mason Hale's accounts without authorization? No, Felix said confidently. That video was doctored. And if anyone's guilty, it's Mason. He paid me to cover it up. A lie. Emily stood immediately. Objection. The judge raised an eyebrow. You're not counsel, Miss Carter. Emily held up a new folder. Request to approach the bench. I have evidence proving Felix tried to bribe a witness last night. The judge waved her forward. Emily handed her a sealed envelope. Inside, a signed affidavit from a paralegal, someone Felix had called after being arrested. The statement detailed how Felix offered them $20,000 to misplace Emily's documents before trial resumed. And there was more, an audio recording. The judge played it over the speakers. Felix's voice came through clearly, she's just a kid. Scare her. Take the files. Do it before morning. No one will believe a little girl anyway. The courtroom was dead silent. The judge stared at Felix. Is this your voice? Felix stammered. That could be anyone, Emily interrupted. We matched the audio with a voicemail you left on Hailtech servers 2 months ago. Same vocal fingerprint. Same inflection. Same lisp. Felix paled. Mason leaned over to Emily and whispered, How did you even get that? She grinned. My cousin's a sound engineer. He owed me a favor. The judge turned to the bailiffs. Remove Mr. Monroe from the stand. He is now under investigation for witness tampering and obstruction. Felix was dragged out. Emily adjusted her glasses again. That's 2 snakes down. With Felix Monroe and Reynolds out of the picture, the courtroom buzzed with relief. But Emily wasn't smiling. Not yet. Back at the defense table, Mason leaned over. We did it. Right? Emily didn't answer. She was staring straight ahead, expression hard. There's one more, she said quietly. The board. Mason blinked. What about them? She turned to him. They knew. At least one of them helped Felix bury the audit. And someone on that board signed off on moving company assets, before Felix even faked the transfers. Someone powerful. Someone quiet. The judge called for a brief recess, and Emily took the opportunity. She stood and faced the court. Your Honor, before this trial resumes, I request the court subpoena all communication records from Hailteca's board members, specifically those tied to asset movement 1 week prior to the alleged fraud. The judge nodded. On what grounds? Emily didn't hesitate. Conspiracy to commit corporate fraud and obstruction of justice. Murmurs rippled through the room. By the time the trial resumed that afternoon, the requested emails and phone records had arrived. Emily scanned them fast, too fast for a child. But she wasn't like other children. She stopped at a flagged message. Subject, Felix, confidential plan moving forward from, Margaret Langford, chairwoman of the board attached, a spreadsheet with planned liquidation of Mason's shares. Dated 5 days before the alleged crime. Emily stood. Your Honor, I'd like to call a surprise witness to the stand, Margaret Langford. Gasps again. The courtroom had become a theater, and Emily was the conductor. Margaret, dignified and icy, approached the stand. Her pearl necklace didn't move as she walked, her posture perfect. She didn't even blink. Ms. Langford, Emily said, is this your email? Margaret adjusted her glasses. Yes. But I assure you, it was taken out of context, Emily interrupted. The spreadsheet shows premeditated liquidation of Mr. Hale's assets. Before any fraud ever occurred. You were planning to remove him from the company even before Felix tampered with the finances. Margaret's voice hardened. I did what was necessary to protect our investors. Emily leaned in. You mean your investments? Because 3 weeks later, you bought 11% of the company's stock, at rock-bottom value, after Mason was falsely accused. The room froze. Even Mason looked like he'd been hit in the chest. The judge stared in disbelief. Is that accurate, Miss Langford? Margaret's silence spoke louder than any words. The judge nodded to the clerk. Begin an immediate inquiry into the Hailtec board. We may be looking at a coordinated financial takedown. Emily sat back down beside Mason, her work relentless. But not over, the courtroom had transformed from a place of judgment to a battlefield of truth, and Emily Carter was winning. With Felix Monroe arrested, Reynolds disgraced, and the Hailtec board under investigation, the final day of the trial had arrived. But one obstacle remained, the formal sentencing hearing. Despite everything, Mason Hale still faced potential liability for what occurred under his leadership. And his company, his life's work, was still in ruins. Emily stood alone at the center of the courtroom. No longer just a girl with a backpack, but a voice the whole country was now listening to. Your Honor, she began, today isn't just about clearing a name. It's about correcting a system that nearly destroyed an innocent teenager to protect the wealthy and powerful. The judge looked at her intently, as did everyone else in the courtroom, including Mason, who could barely breathe. Emily continued. Yes, Mason Hale is young. But he's also brilliant. He built a company that employs thousands. He donated more than half his first earnings to medical charities. And when Felix Monroe stole from his accounts, Mason was asleep in his apartment, recovering from surgery. The time-stamped hospital wristband proves it. She held up the band, enclosed in an evidence bag. The judge raised her brow. And this wasn't submitted before? No, Your Honor. Because Felix tampered with Mason's medical records, too. But I cross-checked it with the hospital's backup logs. His alibi was airtight. It always was. The courtroom held its breath. Emily took one last step forward. Everything that went wrong, every lie, every cover-up, was designed to make the court doubt him. But here's the truth, Mason Hale didn't commit fraud. He was the victim of it. She looked back at Mason for a second, then forward again. And if a 10-year-old girl can uncover this much, imagine what the system could have done, if it wanted to. Silence. Then, the judge took off her glasses. In light of overwhelming evidence, and the failure of both legal counsel and corporate oversight, this court fully exonerates Mason Hale of all charges. All records will be cleared. The courtroom exploded with cheers. Mason froze. Then slowly turned to Emily, tears welling in his eyes. He whispered, "You saved my life." Emily just smiled. "You saved mine first. Remember? The robotics program." Within hours of the verdict, the courthouse steps were swallowed by flashing cameras, blaring microphones, and reporters yelling questions from every direction. Mason was shielded by security. But Emily? She stood in the middle of it all, tiny, composed, and completely unfazed. "Emily, how did you crack the case? Are you really 10? Will you go to law school early? Are you starting your own firm?" She didn't answer at first. She just looked toward the sky for a second, then turned to the crowd and said calmly, "I just wanted the truth." And Mason deserved someone who wouldn't give up on it. The crowd fell silent. That single quote would be played on national TV for weeks. Inside the courthouse lobby, Mason stood with his legal guardian and a few trusted investors. The atmosphere was surreal. One moment, they were preparing for a devastating sentence. Now, everything had changed. "Emily." Mason called as she stepped inside. She jogged up, still adjusting her backpack. "You're famous," he said, half laughing. "I was aiming for justice," she replied. Fame was a side effect. Then, a tall woman in a tailored navy suit stepped forward from the crowd inside. Her presence was calm but authoritative. "Emily Carter." Emily turned, wary. "My name is Natalie Pierce. I'm from the National Juvenile Advocacy Council. We've been following this case closely, and your involvement. What you've done, it's unprecedented." Emily blinked. Natalie continued. "We're prepared to offer you a full scholarship to any law school in the country, when you're ready. And we'd like to bring you on as a junior consultant. Immediately. Part-time, of course." Everyone went quiet. Emily was 10. "Consultant," she repeated. Natalie nodded. "You have instincts lawyers twice your age dream of. And you understand how power works. We want that mind in the room." Emily looked over at Mason. Then at her backpack. Then back at Natalie. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Right now, I have homework." Everyone laughed, except Emily. She was serious. The cameras eventually left. The headlines moved on. But Emily Carter didn't. A few days after the trial, when the noise had settled and Mason Hale was finally reinstated as CEO, Emily asked for one thing, a ride. To the edge of town. To the place where it all began. Mason didn't ask questions. He just drove. They arrived at a quiet cemetery just before sunset. Emily stepped out of the car alone, still wearing her red backpack, the strap slightly frayed from use. She walked past rows of headstones until she stopped at one in particular. Judge Jonathan Carter, beloved father. Defender of truth. Teach them to fight smart. And fight kind. She knelt quietly. Mason watched from a distance, not wanting to interrupt. Emily placed a folded note on the headstone. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I kept the promise, Dad. I didn't let them win." She reached into her backpack and gently placed something next to the flowers, the same flash drive that cracked the case wide open. A symbol of everything she had learned, and everything she had inherited. Then she stood, wiped her eyes with her sleeve, and walked back to the car. Mason opened the door for her. "You okay?" he asked softly. Emily nodded. "He would have liked you." Mason smiled. "And I think the whole world's gonna like you." They drove away in silence, the city lights blinking in the distance. But inside that car sat two people forever changed, one who had built a company, and another who had saved it. She was only 10. But from that day forward, no one ever underestimated Emily Carter again.